Now, Greens politicians have been disgracing themselves over the past day or so by making absurd, opportunistic and cruel links between the politics of climate change and the deadly bushfires in New South Wales and Queensland. They've tried to say Scott Morrison and others are responsible for the bushfires. It's as crazy as that. I've had my say about these macabre, ghoulish and utterly stupid suggestions from Richard Di Natale and Adam Bandt and others. They are suggesting that if Australia had more renewable energy, we wouldn't face these deadly bushfires. None of the horrific bushfires that have always been part of our environment and always will be. The Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, certainly let fly on the ABC this morning.
Well, they don't need the ravings of some pure, enlightened and woke capital city greenies at this time when they're trying to save their homes, when in fact they're going out in many cases and saving other people's homes and leaving their own homes at risk. What they don't need is Adam Bandt and Richard Di Natale trying to get a political point score on this. I mean, it is disgraceful, it is disgusting, and I'll call it out every time.
But what about the media? How have journalists handled this issue? You won't be surprised to learn the ABC always give the unthinking credence to global warming alarmism.
You were speaking to the New South Wales Premier that she said she didn't want to get into a political argument over climate change, but it is a question that is going to continue coming up because people on the ground are telling the reporters that that's what they want to talk about. They want to know what the government is doing and how various attitudes might have led to this situation as well as the drought.
Do these people not stop to think about the history of bushfires, the very nature of our environment, our climate, our vegetation, and how all this is linked? Indeed, it evolved through relentless, ancient and unstoppable history of bushfires? Do none of these people stop and wonder what climate policy in Australia, let alone the world, could ever alter this ecology, this reality? It's as silly as it is offensive. And on regional radio this morning, New South Wales Nationals leader John Barilaro ran out of patience with the ABC's Fiona Poole.
Seeing Scott Morrison and Gladys Berejiklian not prepared to link the two, are you, Deputy Premier?
No, let me support Gladys and the Prime Minister. This is an absolute disgrace for anyone to be talking about climate change while we've lost lives and we've lost assets, and I make no apology for that. For any bloody greenie, lefty out there that wants to talk about climate change when communities are at risk, and over the next 48 hours, we may lose more lives. And if this is the time that people want to talk about climate change, they are a bloody disgrace.
People want to be assured that they're being led. People want to be assured that they have people prepared to make difficult decisions. Is the government prepared to do that?
Oh, we're making difficult decisions. We've got volunteers on the grounds risking their life, as you started this particular interview this morning, risking their lives to save communities and lives. And to anybody that wants to use this moment and this time in relation to a climate change debate are a bloody disgrace. And I'll tell you this, I'm not going to cop it. And if that's the rest of this interview, well, you've lost me for the morning.
Well, we'll leave it there.
You can understand the anger, can't you? ABC journalists came out not in favour of rational thought and reality. No, they came out to condemn the Deputy Prime Minister. Louise Milligan tweeted that some of the most practical, innovative responses to climate change come from people in the bush, that they're worried and acting on it. And then this from the person whose party's stated aim is to represent them. I guess she disagrees. Weird, isn't it? Journalists pretending we can stop bushfires with climate policy. So much for objective assessments of the facts. Much of the media hype started yesterday when New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian was with the Prime Minister visiting the fire zone in Taree. Listen carefully as Scott Morrison is asked a climate question and the Premier, out of shot, says, "Oh, please, not today."
We've asked me to ask you what you're doing about climate change long term. That's what the couple at my hotel.
Yeah, no, I'll give you the same answer I gave yesterday,
honestly,
and that is I'm.
Pretty sensible and understandable response, I would have thought. Perhaps journalists could park their inanity and climate obsession for just a day or two. But the Sydney Morning Herald's Nick O'Malley tweeted he gets why Gladys says not today when people raise climate change during a bushfire, but it reminds him of politicians refusing to discuss gun politics in the US after a mass shooting. It won't wash anymore, he says. Yep, he thinks politicians can take away bushfires but choose not to. It's that inane. Our own Darren Hinch, the Human Headline, tweeted that the Premier was right and that we can have the climate change chat another time. But that wasn't good enough for former ABC host and journalist union activist Quentin Dempster. "That's not like you, Darren," he tweeted. "We can't dodge this. Australian public can handle both empathy and practical support, as well as discussing unprecedented explosive bushfires in early summer." Well, we've shown you before the fires are not unprecedented, and late spring and early summer are the worst bushfire seasons for these parts of the country. And yes, as Paul Barry tweeted, the Weather Bureau says our fire seasons might be getting longer in some parts of the country, which we will see over time. But the fire risk has always been extreme and catastrophic at times. It's so much simpler for some. Greg Jericho, a former public servant who tweets for The Guardian, mocked Berejiklian for not wanting to talk about what he says was the cause of something while that something is happening. Really? Bushfires caused by climate change? Imagine the thought processes. What caused the fires in the 19th century, at the turn of the century, in the 20s and 30s, back on Ash Wednesday in the 1980s? Was that all climate change too? Will Al Gore or Greta Thunberg stop our bush from burning? None of this political posturing alters any of the facts that we have always had. They've always had this deadly risk. We've always had catastrophic bushfires. They're part of our natural environment. They've helped to shape it and they're fuelled by it, which is why we need controlled burns and clearing to reduce fuel and protect lives, measures the Greens so often oppose. And even in the unlikely event that Greens activists and their unthinking journalist supporters convince Australia, then China, Japan, Korea, perhaps Indonesia, India, Brazil and every other country in the world to stop increasing their emissions, perhaps even trim them. Gee, let's imagine they even halve them. Well, we'll still face disasters like this most summers, and we'll certainly face the risk of this sort of disaster, and much worse, every summer all over the country. In which case, what on earth are these journalists doing? Asking hard questions only of the people talking sense and failing to scrutinise the lunatics insinuating they have the magic formula to consign bushfires to the past. This is not journalism. This is not chasing facts and applying rational scrutiny. This is an insult to our intelligence, and it's driven by ideology and by politics.